So we are going to do lessons from state incentives and pilot programs. And you heard about California earlier. We're actually not going to touch on California as much because that was taken care of by our predecessors. But I do have an excellent panel with expertise across the country. So I will introduce you. Sarah Baldwin-Auck, who is Director of Regulatory Program at the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, so working nationwide. Then we have Balvinder Dionarine, who is Project Manager for Distributed Resource Integration at Con Ed, the New York utility. And Kavita Ravi, Director of Emerging Markets at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. So I'll just set the stage here. You know, pilot programs, I like to think of it, it's kind of like getting engaged. It's an exciting sign of things to come, but if it never becomes more than that, it'll be a bit disappointing. And if it's the fifth or sixth time, then you're really getting ready to sort of, let's get on to the real thing. And so the question here that we're going to try to answer is, how can states structure their pilots and their incentives to not stay in pilot cycle forever, but to really nourish a thriving market of activity that creates jobs and deploys a lot of storage and has all those positive benefits for the state. So let's start off with how about New York? We heard a little bit from the previous one, but can you give us a sense statewide? How are we seeing storage incentivized or piloted so far?
Sure. So for New York, we started differently than California and some of the other states. New York did not quite start with storage as an emphasis. They started about 3 years ago with their clean energy standard and REV initiative, where they wanted 50% of renewables from 50% of energy from renewables. They wanted 40% in greenhouse gas emission reduction, and so after 3 years, fast forwarding to November of this year, is when energy storage, Governor Cuomo signed the law that we are actually going to start to mandate energy storage. So we're going to see there's more to come on that, and probably by January of next year, we're supposed to see something regarding that. And during that time, I wouldn't say that New York did not do anything in terms of storage. There has been quite a lot going on in terms of storage. Even NYSERDA has millions of dollars in grants for storage-related projects. Con Edison and many other utilities, we have non-virus alternatives. You guys heard a little bit about it, about Marcus Garvey project and many other projects in my Con Edison service territory. In the rest of the New York State, there are similar projects, and we also have research and development projects. We have demonstration projects testing different types of storage, front of the meter, behind the meter, and we also have transportable storage testing as well.
Yeah, awesome, gotcha. So that's a whole range of things, all within the broader Reforming the Energy Vision reforms that have been going on for many years, and we might see more action coming soon now that the governor has decided to sign that bill. So let's move to Massachusetts. So Kavita, you had a big announcement directly related to piloting storage last week. Tell us about that.
Yes, absolutely. So we took a slightly different route than some of the other states. A few years ago, we had a big solar target that we achieved early. It was 400 megawatts of solar that we reached, or we achieved them maybe 2 years in advance. And then that target was quadrupled. And so at that time, when solar started proliferating, the notion of storage was kind of natural. But it was unclear what to do about it. So as a quasi-state agency, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, in collaboration with the executive branch, undertook a study, a storage study, which was published last year. It's called the State of Charge Report, which really captured the landscape for energy storage in Massachusetts, actually captured the landscape of energy in Massachusetts with particular emphasis on where storage provided some opportunities. It did some cost-benefit analysis on where storage could be useful. came up with an ideal number that the Massachusetts grid could take. It was a very large number. It was 1766 megawatts, and then proceeded to outline policies and recommendations for growing the industry in Massachusetts. So following that, we undertook a solicitation for demonstration projects to uncover business models, because we understood, both from the study and from looking around in the country, that lithium-ion technology was commercially viable. Some of the other technologies were in progress, like making their way to becoming commercially viable. But what was the gap was this word that we're not allowed to say here, which is the value stacking piece, which can make storage economically viable and can prove its value. So our demonstration project RFP was focused on uncovering the business models that can then show that energy storage is indeed economically viable. I mean, just being optimistic about it. Otherwise, it's how it can't. And those are some valuable lessons as well. And we made that the announcement for $20 million and for 26 projects with a variety of business models and use cases just last week.
And how much overall capacity of storage will that, promote?
So that will promote 32 megawatts, 85 megawatt hours in total, 16 and 45 of which will be in the utility territory.
So that's a big deal. That's a lot of storage. Okay, so we got a taste of Massachusetts. We'll come back to that. But Sarah, could you tell us about looking nationally at the landscape? Are there any other notable state approaches to incentivizing the growth of storage that we should at least have on our radar here?
Yes, absolutely, Julian, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. So kind of going back to today's earlier conversation, I think energy storage spirit animal writ large is cheetah, because we are seeing some major developments happening in a few states, and they're running very, very quickly. The majority of states, however, are still way, way behind. The Californias, Massachusetts, New Yorks of the world, we're definitely not seeing the same level of activity and interest in the incentive framework or the mandate framework. But we are seeing some other foundational activities, which I'll talk about a little bit later. On the incentive side, we've got Maryland, which has just announced a new incentive program, Nevada, and then we've got what I would call pseudo-incentives coming out of Oregon's new procurement mandate for storage for their utilities. And I call it pseudo because in a state like Oregon, where we may not see direct incentives for behind-the-meter storage or other storage, we're seeing a call to the utilities to develop their own, which will provide some really important lessons for a nascent market. One of the things I want to point out is that SEPA did some research among their utility members. About 115 of them were surveyed. They represent about 75 million customers across the country. And of them, 71% had interconnected some form of energy storage on their grid in 2016. And of those, 43% said that it was their first project. So while it feels like energy storage is just going gangbusters across the country and all the utilities should be fully on board and educated and understanding, both behind the meter as well as front of meter, we're really still at the early stages of development. And so the pilot program or the incentive program really has an important role to play in establishing good protocols for data collection, goals. What are you trying to do with the pilots and the incentives? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to learn? And from there, how do we validate that those goals are being met and that we're actually accomplishing them? So lots to learn, lots of exciting activity to really keep an eye on. And for those in the room who are sort of prospecting, I would definitely say Nevada is a good one to keep an eye on. They're going to be very busy in the next few years.
Yeah, prospecting in Nevada. You heard it here first. So I should remind us, we want to take your questions. We want this to be very useful to all of you who might be scoping out, pilot projects and stuff. And we had one that I think is relevant here is where are the next opportunities for programs like Massachusetts' recently awarded pilots? So, either one, is there more of that to come in Massachusetts that's been announced so far, and then where else, sort of around the country, are there little pots of money that you can chase after to try out some storage business models?
So I'll start on the question of, is there more to come? Someone just asked me earlier today whether I'd started sleeping from the efforts. I would say we just made the announcement, and those projects have to be contracted, commissioned, and then we have to really collect and publish the data which is trying to achieve the objectives that we set off to accomplish, as Sarah was alluding to earlier. But there are other programs that support storage. Our solar incentive program now has the storage adder. It's called SMART and is due to come out next year. And there's been a lot of stakeholder process in the intervening period. There was a peak demand management program that was published earlier that could incorporate storage. There's been a resiliency round of projects for hospitals. So there's lots of storage stuff. I would say it's not, we're just in the process of finishing, or not even finishing, or undertaking these projects that we announced.
Right. So if if this first round turns out well, would you envision doing a similar round again in the future?
That remains to be seen. I would say that our intention is always to catalyze the market, to allow private sector players to thrive and flourish, and provide the education that's needed on both sides, both from the provider side, but also from the customer side to the benefits of energy storage. So it remains to be seen. We're going to, these projects will hopefully get on the ground within 18 months. That's what we've set off to do. And then we're going to monitor them for 3 years. So it's going to be a little while. But this market is moving so fast. We hope costs will come down dramatically in the meanwhile, as GTM forecasts. So hopefully there'll be a not so nascent market on its own feet at that time, which is not to predict whether we will or not do anything. But I think we want to be very reactive to the market and sometimes proactive to what the gaps are and barriers are.
Yeah.
So for me, I would have to say we have a whole lot of non-wires solutions, non-wires projects in the pipeline. We have some advertised on all of New York State Utilities websites, and those are great opportunities for storage projects to come up, and some of them are targeted for storage projects as well.
Gotcha. Okay, so New York, stuff's happening. Any other come to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I failed to mention New Jersey. Obviously, they were an early adopter, if you will, of energy storage incentives, and it was really on the heels of Sandy that they said, we've got to do something about the fact that our entire state was basically inoperable and shut down for a good many days and into months for some parts of the state. I would say that they hit a little bit of a bump from a regulatory side. They didn't quite go the extra mile to make sure that energy storage had a real robust role to play. They definitely were relying more on the PJM markets to kind of do the heavy lift. They've re-energized the incentive, so I expect that they will see more activity over the forthcoming years. And the elephant in the room, of course, is new governors mean big change. So I expect that we'll see some shifts, if you will. Washington is another state, and granted, it is Pacific Northwest and another vertically integrated state, but they recently issued a policy statement on how utilities should be integrating storage into their integrated resource plans. And it explicitly called out a number of things, one of which is they shouldn't just be looking at wholesale bulk storage, but also behind the meter storage. But it also calls on the modeling efforts to do a lot more, and including the consideration of sub-hourly modeling to basically capture the values that we've been talking about all day that energy storage is uniquely capable of providing. And I would expect that Washington has doubled down on a lot of fronts over the last year related to climate and renewable energy, And storage is just one more layer to add to their clean energy sandwich, and I expect that we'll see a lot more activity up there. And then, there are going to be some unexpected states, Illinois, Ohio, and Minnesota, all of which are undertaking pretty comprehensive grid modernization proceedings, which you two are familiar with as far as the comprehensiveness, but also the layers of complexity that can come with that. And we're really hoping that energy storage plays front and center in those conversations and isn't put to the side and dealt with later, because it really is, obviously, in our view, and I think many here, a key tool in the toolbox for grid modernization and reforming some of the resiliency and security issues, as well as generally evolving the business model for utilities.
Yeah. Well, so it's very clear this is not a one-state business anymore. There's stuff popping up all over the place.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, well, we got actually a very important question from the audience is what is most important when you're bidding a project into a demo or a pilot program, and what differentiates winners from losers? For those of you who get to sort through these different proposals, what are some key takeaways you would recommend?
So I can start, having just done it all summer. I would say we tried to write an RFP that really tried to articulate what we were setting out to achieve, which is this, we wanted to see how storage could be applied in a variety of use cases, uncover the new broadly replicable business models, and really show us how it can provide both monetizable and non-monetizable benefits. Now, to the extent that the RFP is clear and can articulate our objectives, I would say responding to it as comprehensively as possible would be the differentiator. We got many good project proposals. I think some of that is because there had been many of these discussions around the country. So it seemed like the time we put out the RFP, it was echoing what everyone was talking about. So perhaps that was one of the reasons that we got that. We saw some real thought leadership in the kinds of solutions that were proposed, and we really appreciate that, because that's something that the market thinks that they can deliver, both in terms of the value that we were looking for, as well as the viability of the project for them. And so we really appreciated seeing that. And really trying to sort of answer the question that is being asked for is, I think, what can differentiate.
Okay, so follow the rules is
Yes.
always a good.
I would definitely mimic that. And in addition to that, different types of front of the meter, behind the meter, what other business models are there to test, and what other values can storage bring out? We want to, our latest RFP is looking for non-battery energy storage. So we do want to test out, because New York has its challenges with the fire department, with the lithium-ion batteries. And for us to be able to test different types of storage is crucial.
Wow.
So
is
for us,
that like flow batteries or?
any creative ideas that the market has, and they want to bring it in their proposal, and it's a strong idea,
Okay.
we're willing to look at it, and to be hosted on our company facility, leased
Wow.
to them.
Yeah, and so that ties into another question from the audience. This is taking my job away from me here. How should utilities design their storage pilot projects to show that they're building on experiences from across the country and other, the industrial experience that's already being demonstrated elsewhere? So how do you approach that at Con Ed? Like, are you looking at Massachusetts and seeing what they did, or looking at California and, you got to do it yourself, but where do you take in lessons from other places?
There are tons of collaborations. All of Rev work, joint utilities work, and our demos has been speaking to California, speaking to various stakeholders in different parts of the country and around the world, in Europe, Germany, Australia, just so that we can get ideas before we run, actually commit to a demonstration project and come up with the idea to put an RFI or an RFP out for a demonstration project.
Gotcha.
Definitely.
And I guess a corollary to that would be, were there any examples elsewhere in the country in a sort of negative way of here was an early attempt at doing this that didn't work out that you can learn from? And have you encountered any sort of lessons of that variety?
I cannot think of one off top of my head. I mean, the 3 demo projects we have is testing all sorts of business models, from behind the meter with virtual power plant to front of the meter to mobile storage. So we have 3 very different, diverse business models, and our plan to test those.
Yeah.
Unless Sarah could think of.
No, I don't have a specific example, but I would argue, based on what we've heard today and based on what we hear consistently in the states in which IREC works, we clearly have a lack of available recent data, be it cost data or performance data on energy storage that is either publicly available or accessible for the regulatory forum in which we work. And I would say that while it's absolutely 100% encouraged for utilities to check in with their peers and find out their experiences, but to not necessarily rely on experiences from even 5-6 years ago, when potentially today's market is vastly different than that 5 to 6 year ago time frame, and that the lessons we're learning in the more recent time frame are the more relevant and the more influential in terms of shaping pilots and other programs.
Right. I mean, 5 years ago is like prehistoric
Right.
in storage years.
Yeah,
So
storage used to be a turtle, now it's a cheetah. So
Wow,
So
a lot
that's
of evolution
it's a
happening
zoo,
in
I tell you.
just a few years. Yeah. Okay. Well, I was curious. Maybe Bob Bender, could you talk about a specific demo that you all have done, maybe the most recent or furthest along, and tell us, what your goal was and how it's going and what you've learned so far?
Sure. I would start with Brooklyn Queens Demand Management Program, which was our non-wires. That was the predecessor to non-wires projects, where we deferred a $1.2 billion substation using non-traditional ways of doing business. So that was not just the batteries, it was a mix of portfolio of solutions. As you saw in the previous presentation from Demand Energy, it was a night peaking area. So that was challenging from PV perspective, but storage definitely plays a great role in that. So we have customer-sided solutions, including in that is the Marcus Garvey project that Demand Energy spoke about. We also have utility-sided batteries, which is a 12 megawatt hour battery that we have connected on the grid-connected battery. And as successful as the battery project has been so far, it did not come without challenges. And our fire department stipulations being one of the biggest challenge, that we did not anticipate it being as big as it turned out to be, just because until you get into projects like this, you do not understand a 10-foot from the sidewalk may mean you cannot do the project in New York City. So it came with its challenging, but it's interesting because we're learning a lot, and hence we are looking at other types of energy storage solutions which are just as robust and are testing the market and are advanced technologies and are worth testing. So I have other projects to talk about. We actually are doing for utilities to resolve grid needs. We do sometimes have to roll generators out. So instead of generators, we are also looking at a battery storage unit to roll out to a location. So we just bought this battery storage unit, and yes, it's permitted to be located on our site for now for testing, and we're going to see how that goes. So that's another interesting project to test out how that model would work.
Yeah.
And then behind that are the 2 demo projects that front of the meter and the mobile demo projects that's still in the making. And in addition to that is the virtual power plant, which is the PV plus solar behind the meter residential. Our challenge with that is, aside from, because outside of New York City area, fire department was not as much as of a challenge as incentivizing the customers, which you heard in the previous presentations as well.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like that sort of finding out where the rubber hits the road on permitting is a big benefit of these pilots, that you try a small batch and then run into that problem with the fire department, and then you're not.
And it's to educate them and to bring them into the process early on, so they understand what are the hazards associated with it, and where is the comfort zone, where can we meet.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, then, Kavita, do you have any takeaways from your whole Massachusetts state of charge process and the first round of pilots. If another state said right now, I want to do my own study, I guess New York actually is doing this right now. What should they learn from your experience?
So I would say that there is a fair amount of geography-specific factors that can influence this. So, if you think of how much storage is needed in any geography, it could be wildly different based on the energy mix and even the way the energy is delivered to that area. So, I think it's prudent to undertake a study if your geography is distinct from another study that has been done. And I think I would do that if I were to do it again. On the other hand, if the geographies are similar, like some of the New England states could share some of the lessons learned from what we have done in terms of the ISO market barriers or role changes that might be suggested, and other things like the impact of intermittent solar integration, because in that particular geography, it tends to be the solar characteristics tend to be similar and quite different from other states like Arizona. So in that sense, you can take advantage of some commonalities. And then it's really what your compelling energy problems are and how you want to solve them.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to run into a challenge of does every state have to do its own study repeating the process of deciding if storage is valuable or not once you have this stack of reports on the value of storage that have built up over the years. So it sounds like there's some regional variations that you need to take into account. Well, we are closing out on our time, so I want to finish with a lightning round for each of you. And the question is, what can industry players do to ensure the success of state pilots, either helping design them or ensuring that the execution is successful? Take 30 seconds each on that.
So I'll say data and also education of everyone in the room. I would say I struggle with keeping up with all the advances and so on. So just getting out there, talking to a variety of people, but also data to be able to substantiate claims or lessons. These are two of my biggest takeaways. Yeah.
For me, it'll be communication and partnerships is definitely a good way to do that.
I would say think beyond the pilot and think where you are trying to go, both to inform your state regulators and policymakers and utilities, whoever your partners are, but guide them and provide them with information on where we should be heading. I will also add that the industry really should be paying attention to how, and I know it is, but even more so than you already are, paying attention to how energy storage interacts with other existing policies is just as important as getting a new incentive. Perhaps more important, because if you cannot walk in the door and interconnect the project that happens after the pilot because you don't have a definition for energy storage in your interconnection standards, your utility or your regulators don't know how to process the application when it comes in the door, you've got to deal with all sorts of different questions, you're going to have problems. Your market's not going to go beyond the pilot. So think about how energy storage intersects with other existing policies, and there are a lot of them. And I also just want to give a quick pitch to IREC's Charging Ahead report, which we issued earlier this year, which is a state guide for policymakers on energy storage. It's very digestible for them. There's key takeaways. It's kind of how they should think about and understand energy storage. I encourage you to download it, share it with your policymakers, your regulators, and talk to them early in the process, because they're the ones you got to convince of this, not this room.
All right, well, with that, let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. This was a great time, and thank you very much.